The words hung in the air like poison. "We don't have that kind of money lying around, Rachel. You need to be realistic." My mother's voice was sharp final, like the sound of a door locking from the other side. I stood in her living room, clutching a folder thick with hospital documents, the ink still fresh from the cardiologist's pen. My hands trembled not from fear, but from disbelief. $40,000, that was the price of my son's chance to live. I looked at my mother and father sitting together on the cream sofa, her posture rigid, his eyes fixed on the carpet. "Mom," I said, my throat tight. "It's not cosmetic surgery, it's his heart. He's 9. The doctors said this is the best chance he has." My father cleared his throat, avoiding my eyes. "Rachel, your mother and I aren't made of money. We have our retirement to think about." Retirement. The word tasted bitter. I wanted to scream that I wasn't asking for a new house, I was asking for my child's life. "You can take it from your savings," I whispered. "I'll pay you back, I promise." My mother sighed, exasperated. "Rachel, you've been saying that your whole life. I'll pay you back. You chose to have a child alone. You chose this path." I could feel the blood rush to my face. "You mean when my husband left after Noah's diagnosis, when I stayed instead of running away like he did?" She didn't answer. Behind her, the clock ticked loudly, filling the silence. They wouldn't break. I heard the faintest sound from the kitchen laughter. My sister Melissa was home, her voice light and careless. "Mom, have you seen my engagement ring? It's in the velvet box." My mother smiled automatically, as if the air had just become easier to breathe. "In the drawer, sweetie?" Then she looked back at me and her smile vanished. "See, Rachel, this isn't a good time for this conversation. There's a lot going on with the wedding coming up." I stared at her, my mouth dry. "You're planning a wedding while your grandson's heart is failing." She frowned defensive. "Don't dramatize. The doctors said there's still treatment. There's always another option." "Not if I can't pay for it," I said. Her eyes hardened again. "You always make everything sound like an emergency. Maybe if you managed your money better." "I'm working double shifts at the hospital," I interrupted, my voice cracking. "I haven't bought new shoes in 2 years. What more do you want me to manage?" The old grandfather clock chimed, slicing through the tension. My father stood up and muttered something about needing to check the mail. My mother folded her hands neatly in her lap. "We can't help you, Rachel." "I'm sorry. You'll have to figure this out yourself." I looked around the room, the same room where she'd nursed me when I had the flu at 12, the same rug where Noah had once played with his toy cars. It all looked smaller now, meaner, like love had been drained out of it. "If he dies," I said quietly, "will you still think you made the right choice?" Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Don't talk like that. Then do something," I begged. "Please, Mom. Just this once. Choose me." She stood up, signaling the end of the discussion. "I'm sorry, Rachel. We have our own responsibilities. I can't bankrupt myself for a maybe." A maybe. The word hit harder than a slap. I turned toward the door, my legs shaking. As I reached for the handle, Melissa called from the hall, still laughing. "Mom, don't forget the wine tasting tomorrow." My mother smiled again, the warmth in her voice returning instantly. "Of course, honey." I walked out without another word. Outside, the cold, Portland rain soaked my hair as I stood on the porch trying to breathe. I thought of Noah in his hospital bed, his small hand clutching mine, his chest rising unevenly under the oxygen tube. I whispered into the storm, "I won't forget this, Mom. Not ever." Inside, I heard her laughter join Melissa's, a sound that once meant home, but now felt like betrayal carved into the walls. I used to think sacrifice was just another word for love. I was 26 when I found out I was pregnant with Noah, a surprise that changed every line of my future. His father, Eric, had promised forever, but forever lasted exactly 3 months after the ultrasound revealed something wrong with the baby's heart. He left quietly a text that said, "I can't handle this. I'm sorry." That was the last time I saw him. I finished nursing school while working nights at a diner, balancing textbooks on my knees while Noah slept in a portable crib beside the kitchen. When I finally became a registered nurse, I thought life might start getting easier. But then Noah turned 2 and his breathing grew shallow. Doctors used words like congenital defect and long-term management. I remember signing the first surgical consent form with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. That surgery cost $30,000. I sold my car, drained my savings, and my parents helped, then partly out of pity, partly because my father's job at the bank still looked stable. My mother Linda visited the hospital once. She stood by Noah's bed, adjusted his blanket, and said, "You're strong, Rachel. He's lucky to have you." But she looked at the machines more than at her grandson. As the years went by, I got used to managing on my own. I worked 12-hour shifts in the ICU, slept 4 hours, and sometimes forgot to eat. My life became a routine of alarms, medication charts, and bills. Noah grew into a bright, curious boy who loved space documentaries and asked me questions about the stars. Every night before bed, he'd whisper, "Mom, when I get better, can we go to the planetarium again?" I always said yes, though I wasn't sure there would be a when. My parents lived 20 minutes away in a house that felt like a museum of perfection, polished floors, expensive furniture, and Melissa's high school trophies still shining in a glass cabinet. Melissa was the golden one. She'd gone to college in California, majored in marketing, and landed a high-paying job at an ad firm. My mother talked about her as if she'd married into royalty. Melissa's company sent her to New York again, she'd say, glowing with pride. When I came over, I'd catch the change in her tone, the way her eyes dimmed. Her voice grew tired, as if my presence reminded her of something broken she wanted to forget. I still sent her small gifts on holidays, a framed photo of Noah, a candle she liked. She never displayed the photos. "I don't want to see him sick," she once said when I noticed they were missing. "It's depressing for guests." Depressing for guests. I learned to stop expecting warmth, but deep down, I still believed she loved me just in her own guarded way. That belief kept me tethered. When Noah's latest test showed his condition worsening, I sat in my car for nearly an hour outside my parents' driveway rehearsing what to say. I didn't want to beg, but the truth was I had no other choice. I thought if I reminded her of the time she'd held me after my first heartbreak, or the way she used to make chicken soup when I was sick, maybe she'd remember that she had once been gentle. I was wrong. The moment she turned away from me that night, all those memories felt like lies I'd been feeding myself. I drove home in silence, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles whitened. When I opened the apartment door, Noah was asleep on the couch, his oxygen machine humming softly. The room smelled like antiseptic and crayons. I sat beside him and brushed his hair back. His skin was pale, his lashes dark against his cheeks. I whispered, "Grandma and Grandpa can't help right now, baby. But I will find a way. I promise." My voice trembled on the last word, not because I doubted my love, but because for the first time I doubted my strength. Somewhere deep inside, a quiet realization began to grow. Love wasn't enough if you were the only one fighting. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table surrounded by bills that looked like a battlefield of paper and numbers. Noah's cardiologist, Dr. Patel, had called earlier to confirm the estimate for the surgery, $40,000 up front to qualify for the experimental procedure in Seattle. Without it, she said his prognosis was months, not years. Her voice was kind, but the words felt like a verdict. I took a deep breath and dialed my parents' number again. My mother answered on the second ring, her tone clipped. "Rachel." "I thought we discussed this." "We didn't discuss it, Mom," I said, keeping my voice steady. "You decided." There was silence on the line, the kind that made you feel smaller with each passing second. "What do you expect us to do?" she asked finally. "We're not wealthy. We can't just hand out tens of thousands of dollars whenever you need it." I glanced at the photo of Noah taped to the fridge, a smiling boy in a NASA t-shirt holding a paper rocket. "I don't need it, Mom. He does. It's his life." "You always think it's life or death," she said softly, almost weary. "It's exhausting." That word snapped something inside me. Exhausting. You think this is exhausting? Try watching your child gasp for air because his heart can't keep up. Try explaining to him why he can't go outside without an oxygen tank. "Don't guilt me, Rachel." "Then what should I do?" I asked, my voice breaking. Because begging my own mother to save her grandson shouldn't feel like this. My father took the phone, then his tone measured but cold. "You need to explore financing options, honey. Hospitals have programs. You're smart. You'll figure it out. He always said things like that when he didn't want to get involved compliments as armor. I hung up before my anger turned into something worse. That evening, I sat in my car outside the hospital and made a list: bank loans, credit cards, medical charities. I spent the next 3 days calling every one of them. Most required a co-signer. Some asked for collateral I didn't have. The few who approved me offered loans with interest rates that bordered on cruelty. By the end of the week, I'd collected rejection emails like scars. On Friday, I stopped by my parents' house one last time. Melissa's car was parked out front, a white convertible with a pink ribbon tied around the mirror, another gift from her fiancé, Evan, a man whose smile had the smugness of someone who'd never been told no. Through the window, I saw my family gathered around the dining table, laughing over takeout sushi. I knocked once, twice before my father opened the door. His expression faltered. "Rachel, we didn't expect." "I know," I said. "You never do." My mother appeared behind him, her smile brittle. "Now's not the time. Melissa and Evan are here." I looked past her to see Melissa waving casually. "Hey, sis, guess what Mom and I found at the perfect venue, Napa Valley? It's going to be magical." "Napa Valley." I repeated the words, catching in my throat. "That sounds expensive." Melissa grinned. "Only the best, right, Mom?" My mother nodded proudly. "We want it to be perfect. It's her special day." I could taste iron in my mouth. "How much?" I asked, quietly. "What? How much are you spending on this wedding?" My father frowned. "That's none of your business. It is when you tell me you can't spare $40,000 for surgery but can throw 6 figures at a party." My mother's voice rose. "Don't you dare twist this. This is completely different. You can't put a price on happiness." "No," I said, trembling. "But you can on love, apparently." The silence that followed was heavy, choking. Melissa rolled her eyes, muttering, "God, Rachel, why do you always make everything about you?" My mother turned away her final dismissal. "Please leave, Rachel. You're upsetting everyone." I laughed once, a hollow sound that didn't feel like mine. Everyone but the one person dying. I walked out before I broke down in front of them. The night air was cold, sharp, and smelled like wet asphalt. I leaned against my car, staring up at the streetlights until they blurred into halos. For the first time, I wondered if love really meant anything in my family, or if it was just another word they used when it was convenient. 2 weeks later, my phone buzzed while I was folding laundry in the hospital break room. The caller ID read Melissa. I hesitated, then answered. "Rachel, you're not going to believe this, I'm engaged." Her voice bubbled with champagne joy. I forced a smile she couldn't see. "That's wonderful, Mel." "I know, right? Evan proposed last night at the winery." Mom cried. "We're already talking venues, and guess what Mom and Dad said? They're paying for everything." I froze, a shirt slipping from my hands. "Everything?" "Yep, no budget limit. It's going to be elegant but tasteful. You know, Napa Valley in the fall." "Oh, Rach, you'll love it. I want you to be my maid of honor." I stared at the hospital wall, beige and cracked near the vent. "That's great news, Melissa." She kept talking, describing the ring, the dress, the catering company. I could hear laughter in the background, my mother's voice bright and proud. "They said whatever I want. It's their gift to me for finding someone like Evan." My throat tightened. I thought of Noah asleep at home, his oxygen machine whirring. "That's generous of them." "Well, you know how they are," she said with a little laugh. "Dad wants to make it perfect. He said it's once in a lifetime." When we hung up, I sat there in silence until my shift buzzer startled me back. Later that night, I logged into my bank app, hoping maybe a miracle had appeared between paychecks. The balance blinked back, a $142.17. The hospital cafeteria light flickered above me, buzzing like an insect. Somewhere between exhaustion and disbelief, I started laughing, quiet, broken laughter that echoed off the linoleum walls. At that same moment, my mother was probably picking out centerpieces. The next weekend, I stopped by their house to drop off a forgotten tax form from years ago, though really I just wanted to see if it was true. Through the open window, I heard Melissa's voice. "The florist said $12,000 for the arrangements, but Mom wants something more dramatic, maybe orchids flown in." My mother answered, "It's her big day. We'll figure it out." I knocked, pretending surprise when they opened the door. The dining table was covered in catalogs, linen swatches, invitation samples, and a glossy folder that read, Valle d'Oro Estate, 150,000 wedding package. My heart thudded. My mother's eyes flickered with discomfort before she masked it with a smile. "Oh, Rachel, this is just a rough plan. Don't look at those numbers." "Why not?" I asked softly. "They're beautiful numbers." Melissa giggled, flipping her hair. "Don't start, Rach. You always make things heavy." "Heavy," I repeated. "Is that what it is when someone can't breathe without a machine?" The air went cold. My mother's hand trembled slightly on a teacup. "We're doing what we can, Rachel. You can't guilt us into feeling bad for wanting to celebrate." I wanted to say so much to shout that I wasn't asking for guilt, just humanity. But the words turned to dust in my mouth. I picked up a wedding invitation sample from the table-thick cream paper gold edges, a single card that probably cost more than Noah's medication for a month. "It's beautiful," I said, setting it down. My voice was steady, too steady. Melissa grinned. "See? Even Rachel likes it." I left without another word. Driving home, the sun sank over the Portland skyline, turning everything orange and sharp. My eyes stung not from tears, but from the unfairness of a world where love had a price tag and compassion came with receipts. That night, as Noah slept beside me, his chest rising unevenly, I made a silent vow I would not beg them again. If my mother could spend $150,000 on orchids and wine, then I could learn to live without her love. I spent the next few days in a blur of phone calls, paperwork, and sleepless nights. My apartment was starting to look like a storage closet of desperation loan applications stacked on the table, prescription bottles on the counter, a whiteboard filled with reminders I could barely keep up with. Every time I turned around, there was another notice, another due date, another reminder that time was running out for Noah. The cardiologist had said we had 30 days to schedule the surgery before his condition became irreversible. 30 days. It might as well have been a countdown to the end of my world. I worked double shifts, picking up extra hours in the ICU. Some nights I stayed so long the janitor would joke, "You live here now." Rachel and I'd laugh, pretending it didn't feel true. My coworkers were kind. They'd bring coffee, leave notes that said, "Hang in there," but kindness didn't stop the medical bills from arriving. When I finally launched the GoFundMe page, I spent hours writing and rewriting the description. My name is Rachel Bennett. I'm a nurse and a single mom. My son Noah is 9 years old and fighting congenital heart disease. His surgery costs $40,000 and we're out of time. I added photos of him smiling at the park, holding his toy rocket, the light still bright in his eyes. The donations started slow, $20 from a coworker, $50 from a friend I hadn't spoken to in years. The first night I cried when it reached 1,000. For the first time in weeks, I let myself believe maybe, just maybe, we'd make it. But by the end of the week, the campaign stalled at $700 to $800. I refreshed the page so many times my laptop froze. On the 10th day, my mother called. I thought for one fragile second that maybe she had changed her mind. "Rachel," she began, "I saw your GoFundMe page." Her tone was clipped the same tone she used when lecturing me as a teenager. "You need to take that down. It's not appropriate to broadcast our family's struggles online." "Our families," I repeated, stunned. "You mean my son's fight to stay alive?" "It's humiliating," she said. "People will think we don't support you." "You don't," I said flatly. There was a long pause. "That's not fair," she said finally. "We've done so much for you over the years, and all I asked for was one more chance for him. You're making this harder than it needs to be." My laugh came out hollow. "Harder, Mom." "My child is dying. That's as hard as it gets." She sighed. "You're being dramatic again." That word again. Dramatic. The same word she'd used when I told her I was scared after my husband left, when I cried after Noah's first surgery, when I said I couldn't keep doing it alone. It wasn't drama. It was truth. "Goodbye, Mom," I whispered and hung up before she could say another word. I sat on the floor, the hum of the oxygen machine filling the room. Noah stirred on the couch, opening his eyes halfway. Mom. Yeah, baby, did Grandma say she can help? My throat tightened. She's still thinking about it. He nodded, too tired to notice the lie. That night, I stared at the ceiling, counting every hum of the oxygen tank like a heartbeat. Hope came in waves, small, fragile, cruel. I clung to it anyway. I told myself I'd find another way, that someone somewhere would donate more, that a miracle could still happen. But deep down in the hollow space beneath my ribs, I knew the truth. The people who should have loved us the most had already turned away, and I didn't have the strength left to chase after them anymore. By the middle of March, my days blurred into each other like smudged ink. I barely slept. My hands shook from too much caffeine and too little hope. Every hour that passed felt like I was losing ground. I checked the fundraiser constantly. $8,312, $8, $465, $8, $479, and then it stopped. No new donations for 5 days. I called everyone I could think of, every organization, every church, every charity that had ever promised to help families in crisis. They all said the same thing. We're so sorry. The waiting list is months long. But Noah didn't have months. He had weeks. That Friday, when I came home from my shift, the apartment was quiet except for the hum of the oxygen machine. Noah was coloring at the table, his lips slightly pale. Mom, look, he said, holding up a drawing of a rocket ship. It's going to Mars. I smiled and kissed his hair. That's beautiful, sweetheart. When I get better, he said softly. Can we go to NASA? The real one? I bit down on my lip so hard it hurt. Of course, baby. We'll go together. The lie felt like glass in my throat. That night, while he slept, I sat on the floor beside his bed, my laptop glowing in the dark. I wrote an email to my parents. I didn't beg. I didn't plead. I simply said, he's getting worse. The doctor says we have weeks. I don't care about the past. Please, if there's anything you can do. Anything, this is your grandson. He deserves a chance. I hit send and waited. 2 hours later, my phone buzzed. A message from my mother. We can't keep having this conversation. You need to accept reality and make peace with it. Some things just aren't meant to be. I stared at those words until the screen went black. Then I threw the phone across the room. It hit the wall and slid to the floor unbroken, just like my mother, too cold to crack, too proud to bend. The next day, I found out through Melissa's social media that she'd flown to Italy for her venue scouting trip. The caption under her photo read, "Dreams do come true." I stared at it until my vision blurred. That night, Noah had another episode. His breathing became shallow, his little hands clutching at his chest. I called 911, my voice breaking as I gave the address. The paramedics arrived within minutes. One of them, a man with kind eyes, squeezed my shoulder and said, "We'll take care of him, Mom." But the look in his eyes told me he wasn't sure they could. At the hospital, Dr. Patel met me in the hallway, her expression tight. "We stabilized him for now," she said quietly. "But Rachel, it's time to face it. Without the surgery, he won't make it through the next episode." I nodded numb. How long? Maybe a month. Maybe less. When I went into his room, Noah looked so small under the hospital blanket. His eyes fluttered open. "Did it get better, Mom?" he whispered. I took his hand. "You're so brave, Noah. You're stronger than anyone I know." His eyelids drooped and he murmured, "I love you, Mom. To the moon and back." I pressed my forehead to his hand. I couldn't cry anymore. The tears had dried into something heavier, a kind of stillness that felt like the world had stopped turning. That night, as I sat by his bed listening to the machine's beep, I realized something my parents hadn't just refused money. They had refused to see him. They had refused love, compassion, humanity. And one day, they'd have to live with that choice. I didn't know how, but I promised myself, just like I'd promised Noah, I'd make sure they did. Because grief can break you, but it can also make you sharper. I wasn't just a desperate mother anymore. I was a woman who had run out of reasons to forgive. April came cold and merciless, the kind of spring that teased you with light but froze your hope overnight. The GoFundMe had stalled at just over $9,000, barely a dent in what Noah needed. I'd stopped checking it hourly. The disappointment was too heavy. Instead, I poured my energy into him reading aloud, helping him draw rockets, holding his hand through the pain. Each morning, his breaths grew shorter, and I could see it in his eyes. He knew. Children sense more than we ever admit. One afternoon, as I spooned soup into his trembling hands, he asked Mom, if I go to heaven, will I still get to see the stars? I froze, every muscle tightening. You're not going anywhere, Noah, I said, forcing a smile that felt like it might break my face. You're going to grow up and you'll see every star in the sky. He nodded, believing me because children still believed in promises. I didn't. The next day, while I was at work, I saw a photo flash across my phone's screen, a text from a coworker. Is this your sister? It was a social media post, Melissa standing on a sunlit terrace in Florence, a champagne flute in one hand, Evan's arm around her waist. The caption read, "Venue secured, Mom and Dad insisted on the premium package $150K, but worth every penny." I stared at it until my chest went hollow. Every penny. I had begged them for less than a third of that to save their grandson. My legs nearly gave out in the hallway. Later that night when I got home, Noah was asleep, his small chest rising faintly beneath the glow of the oxygen monitor. I sat beside him, scrolling through the endless stream of photos from my sister's wedding planning trip. My parents appeared in many of them, laughing over glasses of wine, strolling through vineyards, my father's arm proudly around my mother's waist. I studied their faces, trying to find any shadow of guilt. There was none. I closed the app and stared into the dark. My pulse thudded in my ears. How could they celebrate while their grandson was fighting for air? How could they smile so easily while I rationed medication to stretch another week? I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the window, the city lights blurring through the tears I didn't want to shed. By morning, I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore. I wrote another message, short, deliberate. Noah's not getting better. He's fading. I don't know how you sleep at night knowing you could change that. I didn't expect a reply. I didn't get one. Instead, 2 days later, a package arrived at my door. Inside was a pastel envelope addressed in my mother's perfect handwriting. I opened it, half hoping for something, an apology, a check, a note of remorse. Instead, it was a wedding invitation. Heavy cream cardstock gold leaf edges, embossed initials. Melissa and Evan. October 14th, Napa Valley, California. I laughed out loud, a sound that cracked halfway through. There was a handwritten note inside. We hope you'll be there, sweetheart. It would mean the world to Melissa. I crushed the paper in my fist. The world to Melissa, I thought. Nothing to Noah. Later that week, Dr. Patel called me into her office. Rachel, she said gently, we've done all we can. The surgery was his best chance. My heart clenched. Then what do we do now? We focus on comfort, make sure he's not in pain. Let him rest. I nodded mechanically, feeling like my soul was leaving my body. I drove home numb, the sky outside streaked with fading orange light. That evening I sat beside Noah as he slept and whispered, I'm sorry, baby. I tried. My phone buzzed a message from my mother. Can you help Melissa with her bridesmaid list? I stared at it for a long time, then deleted it without replying. That was the night something inside me changed forever. Grief wasn't the enemy anymore. It was the forge. I knew I couldn't save my son, but I could save the truth. And one day, when the wedding lights dimmed and the music stopped, they would see what they had done. The days that followed felt like the slowest kind of dying. Noah's laughter disappeared first, replaced by long, quiet hours of sleep. He no longer had the strength to draw or watch his favorite documentaries. I sat beside his bed, holding his hand through each shallow breath, whispering stories about the stars he loved so much. I told him that heaven was full of constellations no telescope could ever see, and that maybe the moon would recognize him when he got there. He smiled weakly at that, his lips pale but still curved like a sliver of dawn. The doctors started talking about comfort measures, home hospice, and quality of remaining life. Each word carved deeper into me. One evening, as I was changing his oxygen line, my phone buzzed on the counter. I ignored it, but it kept ringing 5, 6 times. Finally, I picked it up. It was my mother. "Rachel," she began brightly. "I hope you're not working this weekend. Melissa's bridal shower is Sunday. We want you to come. It would mean a lot to her." I stared at the phone, unable to form words. "Mom," I said slowly, "Noah's in hospice care." "I know, sweetheart, but you can't just sit around waiting for—" She stopped as if the word death were too inconvenient for her mouth. "It's important to show support for your sister. Family should stick together." I laughed, a sound that startled even me. "Family. You've redefined that word beautifully, Mom." She sighed. "You're being cruel. Melissa's been worried about you. She said you don't return her calls." "Her calls," I whispered. "You mean the ones about bridesmaid dresses while my son was coding in a hospital bed?" There was a long pause. "You don't have to be so bitter, Rachel. It's not healthy. Neither is watching your child die while your parents shop for champagne." The silence stretched. Then she said, "You've always had such a flair for drama." That was it. Something inside me went still, not broken, but beyond repair. "Goodbye, Mom." I hung up. She called back twice. I didn't answer. That night, as I sat beside Noah's bed, I realized the only way to survive was to stop expecting anything from them. Not love, not compassion, not even guilt. I had to let the dead weight of hope go. When the end came, it was a Tuesday morning, gray and soft, like the world had decided to match my heart. Noah's breaths grew slower, shallower, until they just stopped. The nurse checked the monitor and shook her head gently. "He's gone," she whispered. I pressed my forehead to his whispering through the tears that finally came. "You can see the stars now, my love. You're free." The funeral was scheduled for that Friday. It was small. Just me, a few friends from work, and my Aunt Teresa, who drove 6 hours from Idaho to stand by my side. She brought flowers and quiet strength, and when she hugged me, I finally let myself cry in someone's arms. My parents didn't come that day, at least not on time. They arrived 40 minutes after the service had ended, dressed impeccably, their faces polished with practiced grief. The florist was late, my mother said, as if explaining why she'd missed a dinner reservation. She placed her bouquet near the casket, stepped back and murmured, "He looks peaceful." My father cleared his throat. "We have to leave soon. The rehearsal dinner is tonight." I stared at them, the words catching in my throat. "You came to your grandson's funeral on your way to a party?" My mother looked offended. "Don't make this harder than it already is." I turned away. "You've already done that for all of us." As they left, I saw Melissa waiting in the car, scrolling through her phone. Her wedding was in 2 days. She never came inside. When I returned home that night, I sat in Noah's empty room surrounded by his drawings of planets and stars. The silence pressed in until I could barely breathe. I whispered to the empty bed, "I won't let them erase you, baby. They'll remember, even if it's the last thing I do." And in that promise, a spark of something cold and deliberate was born, a purpose that grief could not swallow. The morning of Melissa's wedding dawned bright and cruelly beautiful. The sunlight streamed through my blinds as if the world didn't know my son had been buried 2 days earlier. I woke before dawn, the air thick with the scent of lilies from the funeral flowers still sitting in the living room. They'd begun to wilt, the petals curling inward like they couldn't bear to look at the world anymore. I sat there staring at them numb until my phone buzzed. It was a message from my mother. "Wish you were here to share this special day. Melissa looks radiant. We're so proud." There was a photo attached. My sister in a designer gown that probably cost more than my entire medical debt, standing beneath an arch of imported roses. Behind her, my parents beamed. I stared at the image until the tears started again, not from sadness this time, but from something deeper, sharper. They had chosen. They'd made their choice long before this day, but seeing it in full color and sunlight burned it into my chest. I turned off my phone and sat in silence for hours, the only sound the faint ticking of the clock and the ghost of Noah's laughter echoing in the corners of the apartment. By evening, I turned the phone back on, only to find the group chat my mother had added me to filled with more pictures. My parents dancing Melissa tossing her bouquet Evan's smug grin as he cut into a 5-tier cake that could have paid for Noah's medication for an entire year. One caption read, "Best day ever. So blessed." My fingers trembled. I typed a single reply before deleting it halfway through. There was no point. Words couldn't reach people who had already buried their conscience. That night, I poured a glass of cheap wine and opened my laptop. I scrolled through every photo I had of Noah from his first steps to his last smile, and then I began something I hadn't had the courage to start before. I opened a document and began to write everything down: the timeline, the refusals, the dollar amounts. I wrote about every time they said no, about every photo I saw of them spending thousands on flowers and dresses and parties, while their grandson gasped for air. I wrote about how they arrived late to his funeral and left early. It wasn't a story, it was a record. Evidence. Proof. As I typed, my tears dried. The words became steadier, colder. It felt like reclaiming something that had been stolen from me. By the time I was done, it was nearly midnight. Outside, fireworks exploded, celebration from some faraway wedding or event. I stared out the window, imagining it was theirs, and whispered, "You'll get your fireworks, just not the kind you planned." Over the next few weeks, I drifted through life like a shadow. Work felt empty, but it was structure. It kept me from collapsing. My coworkers avoided mentioning Noah, afraid of breaking me open again. I appreciated their silence. The first call from my mother came a week after the wedding. "Rachel, it's Mom. I know you're hurting, but you can't isolate yourself. It's not healthy. You should have come to the wedding. It might have helped you move forward." I hung up. She called again the next day. "You're being cruel," she said into the voicemail. "Melissa's worried sick. We're all trying to support you, but you're shutting us out." Support. The word almost made me laugh. I deleted the message and went back to work. By the third week, I stopped answering any of their calls. Aunt Teresa, bless her heart, was the only one who came by. She brought a homemade casserole and tears she didn't try to hide. "You don't have to talk," she said softly, "but I want you to know you're not crazy." I saw the photos. I saw what they did. I nodded, too tired to speak. Before she left, she pressed my hand. "One day, they'll have to live with it. People always do." I didn't know if I believed that then, but it planted a seed. Because grief might fade, but truth has a long memory, and I had just begun to understand how powerful that could be. 4 months passed before I heard from them again. Christmas was coming, though it didn't feel like Christmas. I hadn't bothered with a tree, just a single candle that I lit every night beside Noah's photo. He was smiling in that picture, a missing tooth showing his eyes bright like he could see something I couldn't. On December 22nd, my phone rang again. My mother's number. I almost ignored it, but some instinct made me answer. "Rachel, we're having Christmas dinner here on Sunday," she began, her voice cautious like she was speaking to a wounded animal. "We'd love for you to come. It's time to heal." I let the silence stretch until she filled it. "Melissa and Evan will be here. Your father got a new job at the bank and we're redecorating the house. It would be nice to have the whole family together again." I closed my eyes. "You want me to come sit at the same table where you planned a wedding instead of helping your grandson live?" She sighed. "Rachel, you can't keep holding on to bitterness. It's not good for you. You have to forgive us." "Forgive you," I whispered. "Mom, you missed his funeral dinner for a rehearsal dinner. You told me to make peace with it." "What exactly am I forgiving?" Her voice hardened. "We did what we thought was right. You can't blame us forever." "I can," I said quietly. "And I do." She hung up first, but I went to the dinner anyway. Not because I forgave them, because I needed to see them. I needed to look at their faces and understand how they managed to live so comfortably with what they'd done. When I arrived, the house looked like a magazine cover. Garlands, candles, gold-rimmed plates, the scent of roasted lamb in the air. My mother opened the door, her smile too bright. "Rachel, you came. Merry Christmas," I said, stepping inside. The table was already set. My father stood, glass of wine in hand. "You look tired, honey." "Work been busy," I didn't answer. Melissa and Evan sat at the far end of the table. She was glowing, her hand resting on her belly. "I'm pregnant," she said proudly. "Isn't it amazing?" My heart clenched. "Congratulations. Mom and Dad are over the moon," she continued. "They're already calling her their first grandchild." I froze. What did you just say? Melissa blinked, confused. Their first grandchild. The room went silent. My mother's fork clattered softly against her plate. It was just a slip, she said quickly. You know what she meant. Do I asked, my voice trembling. Because I had a son. You remember him, don't you? The one you refused to help? Rachel, please, my father said. Don't do this tonight. Do what reminds you that he existed. You're ruining dinner, my mother snapped. Melissa's pregnancy is a blessing. Don't make this about you. Something inside me snapped. About me. You erased him. You act like he never lived because it's easier than admitting what you did. My mother stood, her eyes flashing. Enough, she shouted. You can't keep punishing us for something that couldn't be changed. I stood too, my voice shaking but louder than hers. It could have been changed, $40,000. That's all it would have taken. You spent 3 times that on flowers and food and plane tickets. Don't tell me it couldn't be changed. Melissa was crying now. Rach, stop, please. But I couldn't stop. Years of silence, of swallowing pain, poured out of me like fire. You told me to move on, to forgive, to forget, but I can't forget watching him die while you toasted champagne in Italy. I can't forgive you pretending he never existed. My father slammed his glass down. If you can't let go of the past, you don't belong here. I stared at him, then nodded. You're right. I don't. I walked out without another word, leaving the warmth and lights behind. Outside, the night was cold and sharp. Snowflakes drifted down slowly, catching on my coat. I looked up at the sky, whispering to Noah, You were there first. You always will be. And as the snow fell, I knew forgiveness was never coming, but justice one day would. I didn't speak to them again for almost 4 years. In that time, silence became my peace. I threw myself into work, into purpose, into building a life that didn't depend on anyone else. I went back to school at night and earned my master's in health administration. I was promoted to charge nurse, then assistant director, then head of the unit. The long hours numbed the ache. I stopped crying at night, stopped checking their social media. But I didn't forget. I kept every document, every message, every receipt that tied my parents' wealth to my son's death. It wasn't vengeance anymore. It was truth, preserved like evidence in a case I hadn't yet tried. Then one evening in early May, I got an email from Aunt Teresa. Rachel, I thought you should know your father lost his job. The company went bankrupt and they've lost nearly everything. Their house is going into foreclosure. I read it 3 times. My heart didn't race. It didn't break. It just steadied, like something inevitable had finally arrived. I searched their address in the public listings. The auction date was 6 weeks away. My father's name was right there in black and white notice of foreclosure. I sat back and exhaled the smallest smile ghosting my lips. The universe hadn't forgotten. A week later, the phone rang. I recognized the number immediately. I didn't answer. The voicemail came through minutes later. My father's voice frayed with something I'd never heard before, humility. Rachel, I don't know if you've heard, but things have been difficult. I lost my job. Your mother's health isn't great and we're struggling. We need help. I listened twice. Once as his daughter, once as the woman he'd abandoned when she begged him to save her son. The next day, my mother called. Rachel, please. We're being evicted. The bank says we need $90,000 to keep the house. Melissa can only give so much. You're doing well now. We just need a loan. I almost laughed. A loan. The word felt like a ghost crawling back to haunt them. You're asking me for money, I said quietly. After everything. We're family, she said quickly. You'd do the same for us. No, I replied. I wouldn't. Her breath caught. Please, Rachel. I know you're angry, but we're desperate. We'll pay you back. I closed my eyes, picturing Noah's tiny hand in mine, the soft beeping of the machines, my mother's voice saying, You need to accept reality. I'll think about it, I said and hung up. I didn't think about it. I planned. Over the next few days, I printed out the foreclosure notice, their old wedding invoices, the GoFundMe records, even the texts where my mother told me to stop embarrassing the family. I laid them out across my kitchen table like puzzle pieces of poetic justice. For years, I had dreamed of them feeling helpless just once. Now they were living it. But justice, I realized, wasn't just watching them fall. It was showing them what they'd built, the empire of selfishness they'd mistaken for love collapsing under its own weight. 2 weeks later, I called my father back. "Let's meet," I said. "All of you. Mom, Melissa, too. My apartment, Saturday at 3. He sounded relieved, almost grateful. "Thank you, Rachel. You don't know what this means." "Oh, I do," I said softly. The day came gray and cold, fitting for what was about to happen. I cleaned the apartment until it looked sterile, professional, like a place for business, not forgiveness. I set 3 chairs across from my coffee table, and on it a folder thick with papers. When the knock came, I took one steadying breath and opened the door. My father looked smaller, older. My mother's makeup couldn't hide the exhaustion in her face. Melissa stood behind them, still polished her diamond ring, flashing like defiance. "Rachel," my mother said, stepping forward. "Thank you for seeing us." "Sit," I said simply. They did. I stayed standing, arms crossed, the folder between us like a courtroom exhibit. "You need $90,000 to save your house," I began. "You'll get it, but not for free." My father frowned. "Of course we'll pay it back." "Not with money," I interrupted. "With truth." 3 pairs of eyes turned toward me, confused. I opened the folder and one by one began to lay the pages on the table. "Let's talk about what really costs a life." My mother's hand trembled as I laid the first paper down, a printed copy of my GoFundMe page, the one she'd called humiliating. The title glared up at them in bold black letters: "Help Save My Son's Life." I looked at them, my voice steady but sharp as glass. "Do you remember this? The campaign I started when Noah's doctor said he needed surgery. You told me to take it down because it made you look bad." My father's eyes dropped to the floor. "Rachel, that's not fair." "Fair." I cut him off. "Do you want to talk about fair? Fair would have been my son growing up. Fair would have been you showing up when I begged for help instead of telling me to be realistic." I slid another paper forward, a receipt from their wedding planner. $230,000, I said quietly. "That's what you spent on Melissa's wedding, 3 times what it would have cost to save your grandson's life. And you told me you couldn't afford 40. Melissa's face went pale. "Rach, you can't keep blaming us, can't I?" I said, leaning forward. "Because while you were drinking champagne in Italy, Noah was fighting for air. While you were saying vows under imported flowers, I was signing hospice papers." My mother started to cry, then quiet, shaky sobs that might have moved me once, but not anymore. "Rachel, we made mistakes," she said, her voice trembling. "We know that, but we can't change the past. We're here now asking for your help. Please." I took out the last paper, a photo of Noah in his hospital bed, his tiny chest wrapped in wires. The silence in the room went heavy, suffocating. "This," I said softly, "is what you chose not to help." My father flinched like I'd struck him. My mother's sobs grew louder. Melissa turned away. For a moment, no one spoke. Then I reached into my folder again and pulled out a check. "This is $90,000, I said. Their heads lifted instantly, hope flickering in their eyes like the last light of dying candles. "You can keep your house. You can start over. But there are conditions." "Anything," my father said quickly. "We'll sign whatever you want." I nodded slowly. "First you say it, out loud, that you chose her wedding over his life." "Rachel." "Please," my mother whispered. "Don't make us say it." My tone left no room for mercy. They looked at each other wordless. My father swallowed hard, then spoke, voice barely audible. "We had the money, and we spent it on the wedding instead of Noah's surgery. And I pressed." His voice cracked. "And he died because of it." My mother's face crumpled. "We were wrong," she whispered. "We should have helped you. We should have saved him." I looked at Melissa. "And you? What about your part in this?" "I didn't know," she said quickly. "You never told me how bad it was." "You mean you never asked?" I said. She looked away, ashamed. "Second condition?" I continued. "You take this money, you save your house, and you never contact me again. No calls. No letters. No pretending this can be fixed. You already buried the only bridge between us when you buried your guilt with him." My mother started shaking her head. Rachel, you don't mean that I do, I said, because family is supposed to save each other. You taught me that love has conditions. I'm just following your rules. My father nodded slowly, the weight of defeat settling into his shoulders. If that's what it takes, he said, we'll agree. I handed him a pen and a simple agreement I'd typed up the night before, a statement that they accepted the money under the condition of permanent estrangement. Their signatures came one by one, my father's shaky, my mother's smudged by tears, Melissa's quick and angry. When it was done, I slid the check across the table. My mother reached for my hand, but I pulled back. You made your choices, I said quietly. Now live with them. They stood slowly, gathering their coats. My father paused at the door, his voice breaking. Rachel! One day you'll regret this. I met his eyes. No, I said. One day you'll understand it. The door closed behind them with a final, satisfying click. I sat alone for a long time after they left the apartment silent, except for the sound of my breathing. Then I turned to my laptop, opened my email, and wrote to Aunt Teresa. Aunt T, I thought the family should finally know what really happened. Attached are all the records messages and proof of how they chose a wedding over their grandson's life. I don't need revenge. I just need truth. I attached every document, every receipt, every screenshot, and hit send. Within a week, it spread like wildfire. My parents' friends, their church, their country club, everyone knew. Their image of generosity shattered overnight. The phone calls came, of course, angry voicemails, messages from Melissa accusing me of ruining their lives. I didn't reply, because I hadn't ruined anything. I had simply unmasked it. Months later, word reached me that my father was working part-time at a hardware store. My mother rarely left the house, and Melissa's marriage was crumbling under the weight of gossip. And me, I was finally breathing again. I donated what was left of my savings to a children's cardiac charity, Noah's name engraved on the donor wall. Sometimes I still dream of him standing in a field of stars smiling, and I wake up knowing that justice wasn't about punishment, it was about balance. I gave them a chance to face the truth, and they took it too late. But I walked away free. For the first time in years, I felt peace, not because they suffered, but because I had survived them.